If you're experiencing a lot of existential pain or a spiritual depression or the dark night of the soul, then this video is going to help you to first of all understand some of the symptoms and characteristics of this phenomena, of this existential pain. And more importantly, how to go through it with the most amount of insight, the most amount of benefit, and as little as damage as possible to your life. Because I went through a lot of these experiences and still continue to experience these on my spiritual journey. And I wanted to share with you some of what I found very, very helpful when it comes to experiencing a lot of existential pain. And so I have some bullet points that I want to go through with you during this video. And so the first one is that it's important to understand what can trigger this type of existential pain, a dark night of the soul, or a spiritual depression. And it is usually the case that these experiences of existential pain or a spiritual depression or the dark night of the soul, they usually follow some kind of spiritual peak, some kind of spiritual high. Usually we're talking about some kind of Kundalini awakening, which is something I talked about in my last video, or some psychedelic journeys, or even a beautiful, just a beautiful experience that you had. Usually these kind of very peak high events or high spiritual events lead to a lot of our unprocessed existential pain to come up into the surface. And so it is usually the case that the lows follow the highs and vice versa. So if you recently experienced some kind of Kundalini awakening, some kind of peak spiritual experience, this usually tends to trigger up this existential pain. And so it's important to look at your experiences in a chronological order sometimes and to see, yeah, it does make sense that recently I had maybe a psychedelic journey, or recently I was doing a lot of spiritual practice, and this is what tends to bring up this existential pain into the surface. I also wanted to discuss the different feelings that this dark night of the soul can bring up into the surface, or this existential pain. And so what kind of feelings are we talking about? We can talk about a lot of different types of sadness, sensations that are usually physical sensations, usually associated with the chest area or with the throat. It can feel as if you are grieving, but sometimes it's not exactly clear what you're grieving about. Maybe there hasn't been an experience in your life that you have to grieve for, but it can feel as if you are a vessel for all the unprocessed grief of the world in general, for some kind of grief that has no object. And this can be a bit confusing sometimes, to just feel sad for no reason, to just feel grief for no reason. But this is what comes up in these episodes of existential pain. Other types of feelings can be an aversion to human beings in general. You can feel a bit like that everybody is stuck in their own egos, and feeling a bit of an aversion from society in general, from consumer society, from the way that society is happening. There can be an aversion from humans and from society in general. There can also be a lot of feelings of self-hatred, a lot of fixation on one's negativities, on one's flaws. There can be a lot of self-hatred that also comes into the surface during these periods of existential pain. Other types of feelings can be an understanding of the mortality of human existence, seeing death. You can perhaps have different visions of diseases. It can also be fear of disease, fear of dying. There can also be, during these episodes, a lot of anxiety, maybe for no reason. So you might feel a lot of fear, even though there's no actual reason for you to be afraid from anything in your life right now. So there can be a lot of those types of physical sensations of anxiety and of fear. There can also be feelings of nausea, so kind of like the distaste for food, lack of desire to eat. These types of feelings can also come up during these periods of spiritual depression or existential pain. A myriad of feelings, but all of them are obviously associated with the types of negative experiences. And if you didn't know that this phenomena existed, that the spiritual depression or existential pain existed, this might look like just a depression. But if you experience some kind of spiritual high, spiritual peak, a Kundalini awakening, or some kind of psychedelic journey, that it's very likely that this is a period of existential pain or a dark night of the soul that you're experiencing. I also wanted to talk about the effects that this can have on your life. So going through this kind of spiritual depression or a dark night of the soul or an existential pain period can have a devastating effect on one's life if you don't have the proper support network and the understanding in place. So it can lead to people quitting their jobs. It can lead to people leaving their relationships. It can lead to people making really bad life decisions, because when we are under the influence of these feelings, these really dark, heavy feelings, we don't really think straight. We tend to be very focused on negativity. We tend to be focused on what's not working in our life. And it's usually not the case that we make the best decisions when we're plagued by these very negative feelings. And so it's important to know that the effects this can have on your life can be devastating sometimes. And also, during these periods, we may not be inclined to take very good care of ourselves, not to eat very well, not to exercise. Maybe people who are having issues with self-destructive behavior like addiction, these tend to flare up during these periods. So it's very important to know that this can have this effect on your life. And I also wanted to discuss the length, and this is a very tricky issue to discuss when it comes to dark night of the soul or existential pain, because it can last for a few days, it can last for a few weeks, it can last for months, or it can last for years. That really depends on you and how much work and support you put into your own spiritual journey. And so the length can be any time. It really depends what you do with it and how you deal with it. And so I made this video because I wanted to discuss with you what a spiritual depression or what existential pain can look like. But most importantly, I wanted to look at what we can do about it. Because actually these periods, they can induce a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom into our life. And so I'm going to take you through that. So what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that these periods of time of existential pain lead to more insight, to more wisdom in our life, so that we can be more helpful to the people in our life and to the people that we meet in general? And the first thing is, it's very important to take time to fully feel what's actually happening in your mind, in your heart, and in your body. Because we have a tendency to push away all negative feelings. We have a tendency to push away these kinds of unpleasant experiences. So taking time to fully feel what's actually going on in your body right now, taking time to really feel the depth of this pain, the depth of this suffering is super helpful, because in the depth of this suffering, in the depth of this pain, there's a lot of wisdom. If you just listen to it and you fully feel the pain and you fully cry those tears of this existential pain, you're going to discover a lot of wisdom that lies underneath the surface, so to speak. And usually it tells you a lot of things about human suffering and how it's created, how it manifests in the world. And you can learn a lot if you really allow yourself the time to fully feel the full magnitude of those feelings. And also allow yourself the time to feel the resistance to those feelings. So that's another layer of pain on top of the actual original pain. Another thing that is super important when you're going through existential pain is guidance. Having some kind of teacher or mentor or a community of practitioners that you can discuss this with in person is super helpful, because if you're going through this alone, then it might take longer than it should, and you might be missing certain pieces of wisdom that might be lying underneath the surface, so to speak. Another thing that is really, really helpful when you're going through these periods of time is walking through nature, because if you live in a city, then we're not really connected with nature. Nature can give us also a lot of wisdom, a lot of relief from pain. Simply walking through nature can really help you to go through these periods of time of existential pain with a bit more ease and more peace. Another very important thing is friendship. If you are going through this spiritual depression or an existential pain period, we have a tendency during these periods of time to really disconnect from other human beings, because you may feel misunderstood, you may feel that not many people can understand you or what you're going through. But still maintaining some kind of connection with some friends, some friendships is really important, not to feel isolated during this period of time of existential pain. And another very important point is spiritual practice, having some kind of meditation practice that can help you go through the periods of time of existential pain or a spiritual depression or a dark night of the soul is really important. Some kind of systematic meditation practice that you have learned from a teacher or a mentor is also really important. And the main point that I found in my own practice when I was doing a 5 months silent meditation retreat in which I really explored this dark night of the soul or this existential pain in depth is what I found is that I felt like a vessel, and I continue to feel like a vessel at times. So when we're going through this existential pain, it's really interesting to look at it in a way that some of the pain that you experience is your own personal pain, but some of it is really the pain of being human. You can start to look at it as our pain. And when you start to feel it as our pain as opposed to your own pain, this is when it becomes wisdom. This is when it becomes an increase in your ability to connect with other human beings. This is when it helps you to increase your ability to understand why people do the things that they do. When you start to look at this pain as our pain, as opposed to your own personal pain, this is when it becomes a better ability to really observe why human beings create suffering, how suffering is created in the mind, and what causes it on a moment-to-moment basis. So start to look at yourself as a vessel for pain. I know it's not very helpful when you're going through the pain, but it can be if you start to look at yourself as a vessel containing all this existential pain that is really part and parcel of being human, and the wisdom and the freedom that comes from this suffering is not attained by trying to escape it, but is actually attained by really facing it and really putting your attention on it in a very gentle way, as much as you can in that moment, and really feeling through it in a very deep way. This will lead to a lot of wisdom in your life. And so I hope this video has been helpful to you about the dark night of the soul. If you want more of my help, do click on some of the links below for my free balance of mind training, which can help you with this dark night of the soul. To speak to me personally for a free consultation, or you can also join my free Facebook group to communicate with me, and I'll speak to you soon.